Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and this is a collaboration episode, specifically about a beer that will be released next week in Nashville in advance of the Craft Brewers Conference, but will be available for all of us in the general public to try. Brandon Jones of Embrace the Funk and Yazoo Brewing brought together Russian River Brewing, Allagash Brewing, Jester King, and Green Bench Brewing, along with Bootleg Biology and River Drive Cooperage to create a one-of-a-kind beer. And I'm going to be joined by most of that group in just a moment. But first, Funkfest is coming up on May 6th in Nashville, and it's hosted by Embrace the Funk and Yazoo. And All About Beer is going to be there to record conversations with leading brewers. You can celebrate the world of funky, sour, and wild beer, along with mead, saison, and lagers from over 50 top breweries in the world. Funkfest continues to be a unique festival experience, providing a day of beer, food, and education like no other. Get your tickets now via Eventbrite or by visiting the Yazoo Brewing website. Also, mark your calendars for May 9th. That's when Camp Rauch Beer happens at Barrique Brewing and Blending. It's happening during the Craft Brewers Conference, but you need not be a brewing professional to attend. Starting at 4 p.m. Central that day, come enjoy smoky delights from a dozen of the country's best brewers. Plus, M. Souter is doing a Pints and Panels pop-up. And there's even going to be some live audience podcast recordings, so get there. You can learn more by checking out This Week in Rauch Beer on Facebook, just by simply searching the name of the group, or you can follow on Instagram and Twitter at TW Rauch Beer. Please go visit allaboutbeer.com for original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Beer Travelers, Brewer to Brewer, and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. This show and all of the work we do is supported by you. Please go visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to help keep the content fresh. A few bucks goes a long way to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising on this show, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. The Craft Brewers Conference is an annual event that brings brewers from around the world into a selected city for a few days of education, equipment perusing and buying, and camaraderie. Brewers have also been using the occasion to get together in advance and create and then release collaboration beers. One of the most ambitious, at least from what I've experienced in recent years, will be released on May 1st by Embrace the Funk. That's the wild and wooded side of Yazoo Brewing in Nashville. And that's where the conference is this year. Brandon Jones, the brewer behind ETF, called his friends, Vinnie Cilurzo of Russian River, Jason Perkins of Allagash Brewing, Jeffrey Stuffings of Jester King, and Khristopher Johnson of Green Bench, and they all agreed to lend their time, talent, and inspiration to the beer. Then Jones got Jeff Mello of Bootleg Biology involved on the yeast side, and Matt Albrecht of River Drive Cooperage to sort out the wood. Everyone that I just mentioned, minus Jason Perkins of Allagash, was able to jump on a Zoom earlier this month to talk about the beer, how it all came together, and the spirit of collaboration among brewers and in the beer industry. Here's our conversation. Brandon, lot of folks in the brewing industry and even just, I think, enthusiastic beer drinkers have Nashville on the mind because the Craft Brewers Conference is coming up. Nashville has been in the news for a lot of things lately. But beer-wise, folks who are coming into town who maybe haven't been there in a while, what's the overall beer scene like these days that people should be excited and jazzed about?
I think the availability across the city, you would go to certain parts of the city and there would be, just kind of a dead zone for any sort of locally produced beer. And now it's super cool because, whether you're north of town or downtown or east, wherever, there's usually a brewery within about 5 to 10 minutes from where you are. So if you're looking for something that's produced at the source and you want to go hang out at a cool tap room, I think that's been something that even in the past 5 years since 2018, is when CBC was here, that people probably will be surprised about is how many breweries that are here now and that are making great liquids. Each have their own great things that they're doing. They have their own styles, whether it be the sour wilds, the hazies, the coffee stouts, everybody seems to have found a cool little thing that they're really proud of and they do a great job at. And that's why I think it's, when people do come to Nashville, I mean, whatever you like, I think that there's an availability there, and you can go support it directly and go support it, where it's produced, and see what it's all about.
So one of the things for folks who are listening that are not in or around the beer industry is, so the Craft Brewers Conference comes together every year in a different city, and host breweries or breweries in the host city usually like to put collaboration beers together in advance. There's an official expo beer, official conference beer, but then there's a lot of really cool side projects that are happening. And so for you, Brendan, when you were putting the thoughts together of everybody coming into town, how did this collaboration of just this, murderer's row of names that are on this call with us right now, how did this all come together?
Well, I mean, John, even before I started brewing commercially, I was writing about beer, researching, always trying to get the good word out there about sour, funky, wild beer. I've said it for a decade now. My original writings were just to pull back that veil of mystery for these different beers, because there was a lot of misinformation out there. And as I started writing more, you start to get that confidence up. So you start reaching out to some of these well-known first name people like Vinnie and Tommy, and people that were at the forefront of development in the United States for these styles and for making these styles popular, and for, really blazing a trail for us. And so as you go along throughout your career, there's other people that inspire you and that you gain knowledge from, and you just become friends with, and people you just look up to and respect every single day. And I think that's what I said in my initial email to everybody involved in the project was, I mean, you guys, they seriously are people that I absolutely look up to, and I would not be the brewer that I am without what these folks do day in and day out, and where they helped me get to. So I just really wanted to bring it around to a conference that's all about, collective, bringing people into Nashville about collective knowledge, and, not just do it because, hey, it's a bunch of cool names on a label. It needed purpose. It needed a reason. It needed history. It needed a story behind it. And so I just thought of, 4 or 5 people that I thought would be, would be along in the project. And I'll tell you, I sent out that email in the evening, and within 12 hours, everybody was in. Like, everybody was like, yep, we're in, we're going to do it. And I was just like, I was floating on clouds that day, because I was like, holy crap, this project is going to happen. And as we got to talking, of course, as you're doing collaborations, it was really cool to see how it developed, because it was still my whole project, or my whole idea was, bring everybody together. But once I started looking at who the breweries were, we had a Northeast brewery, we had a West Coast Pacific brewery, we have a brewery down in the Atlantic in Florida, then we have a Midwest, and we have us where everybody's coming. So then it started seeming like, okay, now we're really getting into this, where everybody's coming to Nashville for this, and this is going to line up, because we're bringing in all these brewers to Nashville. So let's bring it in as a reflection, as some sort of ingredient, some sort of stage inside this beer. So that's kind of the long and the short for me, how it came together. Well, as you say, like with the names on it, I'm sitting here looking at the label right now, and I'd be hard pressed for my career and for what I think these folks do to inspire me and to be good people in the brewing community. I'd be hard pressed to find, another group of folks that I would rather do this project with for this year. So
I know there's always a lot of focus on hops by consumers these days, but Brendan, you were telling me beforehand, and Vinnie, I want to bring you into the conversation, that as this conversation started, the idea came from California and Vinnie to start using locally sourced malts for all of the various breweries involved in this project. And it really does seem to be coming be becoming a much more local product, and something that can be a part of a beer conversation in a way that maybe 10 years ago it wasn't quite that way. So Vinnie, I'm wondering from your perspective, where you see craft malt playing a role not only in this beer but in the larger beer sense these days, and then maybe you can tell us the malt that you sourced for this project.
Yeah, so there's craft malt definitely is a double-edged sword, because if you're of any size as a brewery, as we are, we're over 40,000 barrels now, using 100% craft malt just isn't feasible from a financial standpoint or a supply standpoint, to get silos filled, that sort of thing. But with that said, there's always the one-off beers. We've got our 20-barrel Santa Rosa facility. We have a 5-barrel pilot brewery, and we are often using Admiral Malt, which is a local malting company. When Brandon asked us to be a part of this project, and the idea was being bounced around about sending bugs over, and as well as maybe a local malt or some cereal grain, instantly I went to a Pilsner malt that we get from Admiral. But even more so was that it was actually grown right here in Sonoma County by a local farmer who actually picks up spent grain from us from the Santa Rosa brewery. He also grows hops for us when we make a wet hop beer locally. So it just seemed really natural to use the Crane malt from our friends Ron and Erica Crane. They shipped it a hour south to Alameda to Admiral, had it malted, and then and we got it back. So it's keeping it pretty local, and that's a pretty neat way to be brewing, to be able to tie in local malts. And obviously we had to ship this out to Nashville for Brandon to brew with it, but it's just a neat way to have a little bit of local connection from each of the breweries, sending something out, such as we did with the Pilsner malt.
Yeah. Jeffrey Stuffings, what about you? What's the malt? What's the grain that you felt was going to be representative of your brewery and your region?
Sure. So we work with Tex Malt, which their malting house is in Fort Worth, Texas. And the farms they work with are in the Texas Panhandle. There's this area known as the Brownfield near Lubbock. And it's kind of the breadbasket of Texas. So we sent some malted barley, 2-row. Malted grains, and at least malted barley in Texas was, from what I understand, historically in fashion, but it kind of fallen by the wayside. But thanks to originally Blacklands Malt, which is unfortunately now defunct. But then following them, Tex Malt out of Fort Worth, we really have access to malted barley and malted wheat for essentially all of our base malts. We're pretty small by volume still, do about like 2,000 to 3,000 barrels a year. So it has been feasible for us to do all of our base malts, except for some one-off English beers or something with local grain. But no, I mean, it's one of my favorite parts about craft beer is being able to support local agriculture, support local economy, and then also just have a little bit of that variation, that regional variation in flavor. I'm not here to say that Texas malt is any better or worse than any other malt in other parts of the U.S. or the world, but it is unique, and I like just having that little bit of the backbone of the beer, being in our case, well water and Texas malt. So I know we're going to talk about fermentation, but when you talk about local malts and local yeasts, that to me, that's the thing I get most excited about in beer.
Chris Johnson, before we started, I expressed skepticism about Florida grown grain, and you correctly put me in my place. So for everybody else who is unfamiliar with what the Sunshine State knows about grain, fill us in on your rye.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, John, for putting us together. Brandon, obviously, for reaching out to all of us and letting us kind of work together. It's been awesome. So, the idea of being to bring in these cool elements around the country and put them together and having the trust in someone like Brandon has been really cool. And it's been exciting to see like his excitement about, some of the things that maybe we can supply. And while Florida isn't necessarily like a place that grows a ton of grain, as you said there, John, I jokingly told him earlier that, you just, you put it in the ground, put some water on it, and all you need is some sunshine. We got plenty of that.
And I was like, I don't need your sarcasm. I'm from New Jersey.
Yeah. So basically pretty close to us, somewhat like a little bit over an hour, kind of from where I specifically am in St. Pete, Florida, in the Tampa Bay area. There's in Pasco County, there's a huge spot where they grow quite a few different grains, but one of the actually leading crops is rye. And it's actually a varietal that's generally sold as called Florida 401 rye. It's basically this like Florida, this variety that has sort of is adapted to Florida climate, like works fairly well here. So that's kind of why it's somewhat unique, to us and something that we can grow. There's actually, it's like in Dade City kind of area in Pasco. There's a family there that's been growing grain there since like the 50s. And it's this, this non-GMO selected seed that they've been breeding. And he's got, I know that there's a guy there named Steve Melton, who is a ranch owner. And like, he's got like 100-acre rye field, I think over a course of a few other ranches. They've got like a collective in that area of, I want to say it was like 600 acres. No, over 700 acres, I think is what it was, where they're just growing rye. And so there aren't too many other like varietals that we grow as far as like grains in Florida, but it's one that like, especially some smaller distilleries in the state kind of swear by. And then some here in sort of Tampa Bay as well. I know some of the smaller craft distilleries really love obviously using some of the Florida rye malt. So yeah, it's provides like some classic rye character. It's a little more rustic because, it's grown in Florida and it's, it's not as mass produced, kind of alluding to some of the malts that, kind of Vinnie was talking about that most of us still use on a day-to-day basis, but a little more rustic and, sometimes because of that, somewhat unpredictable. Sometimes those protein levels are different and, per harvest, and they're a little more susceptible to sort of changes every harvest. So just really cool to kind of pick something, somewhat rural and local at the same time to throw into this collab.
Nice. So Brandon, you mentioned Allagash sent down some of their wheat that they use in white, which is pretty cool. Quickly tell us about Tennessee grain that's being used in this, and then also run us fast through the hop profile because I really want to get into fermentation. Yeah,
so the Cumberland Pilsner that we use is actually a 2-row barley. It's here from Tennessee. It's done by Riverbend Malt House. For us, and but I really like it for beers that can seemingly have a lot going on because it can be mostly doughy with some really nice just aromatics with a bit of graininess to it, but also it being grown about an hour from here, Cumberland. So where I am in Middle Tennessee, you have the Cumberland Plateau that separates East Tennessee and Middle Tennessee. So it's more of a plateau grown Pilsner. We've used it in a number of projects here, but for sure this was the most locally sourced I could go with, just based on the idea that Vinnie came up with. So and I think we end up using a little bit of wheat. Tennessee does have a whole lot of wheat in this area, but we were able to source a little bit of wheat also to supplement with. Like you said, the wheat that Jason sent down from Allagash is the white wheat that they use in their famous Belgian wit. So that was pretty cool.
You faded out a little bit there. You back? All right. We've lost Brandon for a second. So I will come back to him when he comes back online. Let's switch it over to talking about fermentation as long as everybody else is still with me. Jeff, when you think about Jeff Stuffings, when you think about putting a collaboration together, obviously all of the breweries involved are known for their house cultures, are known for mixed fermentation beers. What did you want to contribute yeast-wise, fermentation-wise, to this, and why?
Yeah, so kind of yeast or culture swaps is one of my favorite thing to do in beer in general, as well as collaborations. We've done various methods of doing that, whether it's combining mixed cultures, shipping wort across state lines that's been inoculated with yeast overnight in the cool ship, shipping funky barrels from one brewery to another. So kind of, having the microbes, they interact is a lot of fun, and just seeing the variation you get through those kind of culture swaps, as I phrased it, is a lot of fun. As far as like what to expect, that's always kind of the mystery of it, and really what I think makes this style of beer making most interesting and fun is, I didn't really know exactly what to expect. There's other variables like time, temperature, hopping rates, the vessel in which the beer ages. So it's not total random roll of the dice. As far as what it would yield, whether it is kind of more like tropical stone fruit, and where it may be more like dry spice, or maybe like real kind of like funky Brett character. That's simply I don't I haven't even tasted the beer yet, so I really had no expectations over where the fermentation would go when you get like that many mixed cultures kind of at play.
Vinnie, what about you? Did you have expectations, and what did you send in?
I think to follow up on what Jeffrey was just talking about, I think the common denominator here, though, is that we all respect each other's, beer and quality. And so, that in and of itself is a reflection of each of our own cultures, that we've built over time and whatnot, and what we ship to sent to Brandon. So although, I'd echo what Jeffrey said, that, we certainly had no idea what it was going to taste like, really even what the expectation was going to be. I did know it's going to be a really nice beer, because everyone in this group here on this collaboration makes really nice, well-rounded, funky beer. None of us have beers that have, jagged edges of acetic acid or anything, to that extent. So to me, it's just more of a feeling of, man, everyone in this group makes amazing beer, and let's put it together and see what we get. And I'm super, super excited to get to Nashville and try the beer in a few weeks here.
I imagine you have a number of strains that you could pick from to contribute to a project like this. So what did you send?
Actually, we for our Brettanomyces, which is not what I sent our bacteria culture. That's our culture from our Sinambic, which is our spontaneous fermented beer. And, that's also what that's the bacteria we add to all of our non-spontaneous beer as well. So we have not bought a bacteria culture in probably 15 or plus years. So we'll actually take the dregs of a barrel of Sinambic and then add some wort or beer and grow it up. And then that's how we add bacteria to all of our beer. So that's actually what I sent to Brandon, was our house bacteria culture, which technically is the dregs from a Sinambic barrel, which also does have wild yeast in it and whatnot. And it's been some time since I've sent it to a lab to look at it. I take the approach, and I'd be curious what the rest of the brewers on this call do, but if it changes, it changes. I'm not trying to hold our culture to a specific flavor profile. And if it goes a certain direction, then it goes a certain direction. I also know that if the tank of bacteria does go south, I can always just drain a barrel of Sinambic and start it over again, because we do have enough years of making spontaneous beer that I have the confidence that we can get it back on track again. But that's only happened once since we've been making spontaneous beer, which goes back to, I don't know, 2005 or something like that.
Yikes. Chris Johnson, does that square with your approach?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess we also kind of have, two kind of different cultures that we use for most of our fermentation forward stuff. I mean, obviously there's like exceptions to that rule sometimes when, sometimes I'm doing something more fermentation forward that might be slightly cleaner. But generally speaking, similar to Vinnie, we do have sort of like our Brett culture, and then we have like mixed culture side of things, and oftentimes those get blended together or used simultaneously. But I also like to isolate those and kind of play with them in separate forms. So I had to sort of choose what to send on this one, knowing just through the email thread and chatting with the guys here like what other people were sending. I elected to use our Brett culture, which, I find, has I wouldn't call it an overly dominant character, but it stands out a little bit in its fermentation character, which I always really, really, really love. It's soft, but it tastes like ours kind of thing. And, knowing that we were going to get some, bacterial cultures that come from spontaneous beer, via Vinnie and Jeff, and knowing we were going to get from Allagash as well, from Jason, I felt like maybe the best thing that I could probably contribute was more on the yeast side and more of, sort of the funky side of the fermentation, and maybe a little bit less on the bacteria, acid profile, knowing that we were going to have some really, really cool acid, character that were spontaneous from around the country. So that was kind of the route I took, using more of a saison focused, farmhouse focused profile that, tastes like some of our more farmhouse forward beers versus some of our mixed culture beers. Felt like that was the best way we could contribute to some of the excellent flavors that, their cultures have.
Jeff Mello, I want to bring you into this conversation here, and you were responsible for gathering these samples, getting them over to Embrace the Funk. What was your job like in putting this all together?
It was to be super happy to be involved, I think, because Brandon is a visionary, and when he says, "Hey, I want to bring some amazing brewers together and make this beer, and I have a strong vision for it. Will you help us, handle these cultures and bank them and prop them for me?" And it's kind of like the Queen of England saying, "Hey, will you guard the crown jewels for me?" It's a really special thing to be involved in this project, because we spent a lot of time talking to brewers and interacting with brewers and, thinking about microbes. And we get to be creative in our own way. But when someone comes to us with a vision, it's kind of fun to just sit back and go, "Hey, we'll be the keepers of the keys." And I think it was fun getting to talk to each of the people on this call, and Jason from Allagash as well, and just kind of get a sense of what they were sending us, a little sense of how it should be prepared. Jason from Allagash had very specific instructions for us, because they sent their Brett culture, and he knows it very well. And essentially, it was already came in a purified form, as opposed to the other brewers who sent kind of a mixed culture, which is a little bit, can go lots of different places depending on when you harvest it. But they gave us a Brett that they'd used lots of times, and they had very specific understandings of how it could be grown. And so all that information was really helpful for us, just to keep those cultures fresh, keep them as close to how they were sent to us, especially with mixed cultures. It's a living organism. It's a multicellular organism in some ways, made up of yeast and bacteria, and our job is to keep that as close to how it was originally sent to us. And so if we were doing our job, we were able to give those cultures to Brandon in the way that, essentially the brewer meant. And then Brandon had his own unique mad scientist vision. And so he's like, what I know about these cultures, I want X amount of this one, I want Y amount of this one, and Z of this one. And that's exactly what he told us. And that was the symphony that he was conducting. And then he told us that he wanted as the base a Nashville yeast strain. This was a Nashville-centric beer that was being brewed for CBC. And that was the primary driver of this beer for primary fermentation, was a Nashville yeast strain that we had sourced just a couple miles from our lab, and that Brandon has used in a few different beers. So that's just a special thing that we got to contribute, is a culture that we found, and it's pretty awesome that we're kind of up there in the pantheon of wild yeast producers and harvesters and fermentors, that we got to be part of this project in that way too.
I imagine to the three non-Nashville brewers on this call, that when you are putting a collaboration together, there is a reasonable amount of trust. One, that you're going to do a collaboration with somebody, but two, that they're going to captain the ship, and that you're going to trust them to take your beloved product and do something meaningful with it. And Jones, if you're back with us now, and I think you are. Being called a mad scientist and putting a symphony together. Walk us through how you did that, with the guidance from the brewers that are also on this call.
Well, I mean, and I'm back, right? You can hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. So being very fortunate that I do like to drink a lot of beer, and I do like to drink everybody's beer that is a part of this project. I had a good idea, especially from having tasted many batches of beatification and drinking off the foeder, Green Bench. Chris and Jeffrey and I have brewed together 5 or 6 times now. And consumed a lot of Allagash. I did have an idea once we started talking about the cultures. I did have an idea of what they produce and what they can do individually. So you just start thinking about it and start writing down notes, and it does look like it does look like a mad scientist or ramblings of a madman. We start writing these ideas down on what you think temperature might do to these different cultures, and where we were going to go, if we were going to primary ferment everything in a conical cylindrical tank, or like one of our flat bottoms, when to add everything. So what I knew about the cultures, it was working out the stages of adding them. Everything was inside the beer within the first 24 hours. But giving a couple of things a head start, like that yeast that Jeff Mello was talking about, the 37211 that we use in a beer we call Local. I'm very familiar with it. I know the temperature range on it. So what I wanted to do was pitch that first, and then slowly bring down the temp on it, so it didn't produce too many esters up front, along with the cultures from Green Bench. And I knew that the Brett was going to be decently slow growing from Jason, since I talked to him. So adding that within, 8 hours or so. And then that following morning, adding the Russian River and the Jester King, just so we could have those stages. And I do think that having worked with some of the Jester cultures before, there's a lot of potential for some really nice esterification that takes place with some of the other strains, like our Local strain. So, which I think that definitely translated through, highlighting too from beatification always gives me this just amazing, natural white wine notes to it. So I knew that we were going to get those notes out of there. We just needed to let those develop in a very, long-term pleasing way. And it did. It came out. I'm very happy to say it really did. The symbiont, the symbiont cultures did play out like I had hoped, within a decent percentage. I'm very happy with how the microbes played into it, and then start adding in the barrel characteristics of the beer. Everything hit basically the way I wanted to, 13 months ago when we came up with this.
Let's bring Matt from River Drive Cooperage into this. Matt, when you and Brandon started having this conversation and thinking about, barrels and thinking about wood for something like this, where did your mind go? And then what did you ultimately suggest to put forward?
Yeah, I will say, maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but I'm also okay with that. I think Brandon really steered the ship on what he was looking for, and that's kind of, I like to operate one of two ways. I love it when brewers come to us and say, hey, here's a beer. What can I do with it? What do you got? How can we play with the wood? And that allows me to be, really creative and figure out what we've got and what would work. But then on the contrary, I love it when brewers come to me, like Brandon did in this case, and said, "Hey, here's exactly what I'm looking for. Here's what I'm trying to do. How can you help?" And in that case, when we decided to go with we went with some red wine puncheons, and then we also added some smaller or regular sized, white wine barrels to this. And it's funny when Brandon first came to me and said, "Hey, I'm working on this project for CBC. Working on this little project here." I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure. Happy to help. What can we do?" And then as we get talking about it, he starts kind of name dropping, like, "Oh, it'll be great because we're getting this from here and that from here." And I'm like, "Oh, wait!" I'm like, "Whoa, wait a minute. This is not a little project." And actually, a lot of it worked really good because with Allagash being almost right next door to us, to about 20 minutes up the road, we were able to, team up there and kind of joint effort and get all of the stuff all shipped down together. And I think it worked out really well.
I dig it. Somebody will point out to me, Brandon, that I didn't follow up with you on the hops question. So just before whoever's screaming at their radio right now is, you didn't tell us about the hops. Very quickly, 30 seconds. Tell us what's in the hop bill.
So the initial hop bill, we went minimal just because we knew we were looking for a more base malt driven beer. So we just used saws in the initial kettle, and then a little bit at flame out. Then once I think with Vinnie and Jason, I talked a lot about making sure that we were playing off the character of the final beer and not trying to override it with hops. We just wanted to really just kind of give a nice little pop in there. So we ended up using Enigma hops, which really play off the two barrel selections that we had. Enigma hops, that's a Southern Hemisphere hop that gives you a lot of kind of sweet berry, currant character, raspberry type character from that portion of the blend, from that hop. And then when we blend all that together with the Sauv Blanc barrels and the Pinot Noir barrels, you do get that kind of sweet fruit, which ties in a lot to the Sauv Blanc. So again, we were playing off characters that were already there and just giving a little bit of a highlight to it, just kind of a little punch to it, just to kind of offset some of the or offset it and create the roundness that I wanted to in the aromatics. So it wasn't just all barrel and beer. It was just a little bit there, so you notice those hop flavors. And plus, Enigma's a cool sounding hop too.
What's called Octatonic. You're releasing it on May 1st in 16-ounce cans and in draft, and it's going to be at Funkfest, which I think everybody who's on this call is going to be at. I want to swing back around to the brewers in our last few minutes here. Khristopher Johnson, as there's so many breweries in the country right now, and there's always, I'm sure, chances to go to festivals and do collaborations. As you can be more discerning these days, what do you look for when joining a project like this or any collaboration? Like what do you want to get out of it professionally at the end of the day?
Wow. Well, I think at the end of the day, I want to make great beer. Like I want to make something that, is intriguing, that I'm going to learn from, that is going to provide, sort of opportunities to play with things that maybe, I would not have had an opportunity to, and I think, when Brandon asked that, that's how it felt. It felt like, well, this is an opportunity for me to work. I mean, I have worked with many of the people so far, like Brandon and I, and Jeff, and Jason, not Vinnie yet, but I guess
now you have, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so
update the resume.
Yeah, exactly. I got to add another line to my long email signature. So anyway, that's what I look for. I look for ways in which I can learn and do something challenging. And at the end of the day, make delicious beer. It's as far as like festivals go, I don't think I've missed an Embrace the Funk since the first one I went to, which is several years ago, barring COVID, shutdowns and everything. But, not only is it, a place I want to be every year, and with people I want to be with every year. Brandon and the team and Linus and the whole Yazoo crew throw one hell of a party, and they celebrate kind of the same stuff that we love. And it's also like, I'm from Tennessee, so it's always like home soil for me. I love hopping home and feeling that Tennessee ground beneath my feet, and it feels different there for me. So it's always a special place, and being able to do that and share it with special people is really cool. And if we can make a dope beer in the process, then sign me up.
Jeffrey Stuffings, as you think about the collaborative nature of beer these days, I know you have a lot of folks who come to your farm, come to your brewery. They really want to get a true taste of place. Is this a chance to broaden a conversation to beer drinkers by doing a collaboration like this?
Yeah, very, very much so. Brandon, to me, has been just one of the, if not the kind of Pied Piper of wild and funky beers. His original, I mean, I've told him this and said this publicly many times, but his original, Embrace the Funk blog was one of these small handful of sources that, taught me how to begin making these beers. And so, basically, if anything Brandon, this is kind of echoing previous points, anything Brandon is involved with, it's going to be cool, it's going to be quality, and it's going to advance the message of fermentation, beyond pure culture brewers yeast. I mean, we love our pure culture beers as well, but preaching the gospel of wild and funky beers is a continuous project, and something that, we work here at Jester King to try to tell every day, and being able to, project that message abroad through cool collaborations like this is really special and important to, keep proclaiming these styles.
Vinnie, I know you mentioned that you've been doing this for quite some time now, and you've certainly inspired a lot of brewers to take up a mash paddle. And one of the things about the brewery that I've always admired is that you're constantly tinkering, you're constantly forward thinking, and I wonder where your beer educational curiosity is taking you at the moment.
Well, we, from a funky standpoint, we really have started to, I kind of got re-inspired at the beginning of the pandemic. I had a little extra time. So we just really started looking at other ways to take our funky program to a different direction, maybe not to the next level, with the idea of really more of a focus on grapes. We had already started a line of beers called Intinction, where we did Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot and Syrah. But that led me down the rabbit hole of grape pumice, so dried, pressed grapes, if you will. So far, only reds, but we've messed around with Pinot Noir, Cabernet, Syrah, Petit Syrah. We're mainly now focusing on the Petit Syrah and the Cabernet. Probably mess around with some white pumice this year. Also, lees, grape lees. We have a pretty interesting beer we did a couple years ago, where we took some native lees from a local winery and then fermented a saison with it, primary fermented it, and then went into barrels from that winery. Then bottle conditioned it with a local native wine yeast called Rock Pile. And there was a little bit of Cinnamic blended into that as well. So all native bugs. So that's really, I mean, if those that know Natalie and I know, they know that we also have a great love for wine. So that really brings together my background as a, growing up in the winery as a kid, my love of beer, my love of wine, and seeing what we can do to bring them together. And I believe we're going to be bringing one of the pumice beers. And for me, the idea is to like blur the line between what wine and beer can be. And I think we've done that especially with the Petite Syrah pumice beer.
Bringing that to Funk Fest.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know you and I have some sort of educational session together, and be honest with you, I can't remember what the topic is.
We haven't landed on it yet, so that's fine. You'll get an email next week, and we'll hash it out about 5 minutes beforehand.
I like it.
Chris Johnson did it 2 years ago, and I think it was about 4 seconds before the mics went hot, where I was like, "What are we talking about?" He's like, "I don't know, decoction." I was like, "Great, we're talking decoction."
Yeah.
So
well, it'll be something funky, and we've also done a really cool beer where it's the Intinction Sauvignon Blanc base with more Sauvignon Blanc juice, which is all local from a Dutton Vineyards and Winery, which actually they grew hops years ago here. And then we dry hopped it with some Nelson, and that's probably something that the other brewers on this call have done before. Nelson hops and Sauvignon Blanc are just a match made in heaven. But yeah, I think we'll be bringing a little bit of everything, and hopefully we can be pouring some of these at the fest in a couple of weeks. That's going to be great. Brandon will point out that tickets are on sale for Funk Fest right now, wherever tickets are sold.
Yes,
I don't know where that is.
All of Eventbrite.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll put this up as well. Yeah. We're just about out of time. I know Vinnie has to jump, but Brandon, final thoughts on what people can expect from this beer, how you're feeling about it right now as we're just weeks away from its debut.
Yeah. So as I'm sipping on a little bit here, expect a nice dry beer with one of my favorite characters in mixed culture and saison beer is always a big minerality, almost like a wet pavement type of flavor that I really enjoy out of a lot of natural wine. I think you'll enjoy it's multiple beers in one glass. If you have it cold, you're probably going to get a lot more of the white wine character out of it from the barrels. A lot more of the yeast driven. Let it warm up. You're going to get a little more of that dark berry. Aromatics will start boosting out. The beer ended up around a little over 6% ABV. pH was yesterday when I took it for the final, it was 3.67. So not super sour. A lot of nice acidity there just to bring it around. I'm almost I'm almost speechless sitting here actually talking about it because, I've had a lot to say about it over the past 12 months, but now that it's kind of here, I'm like, wow, we pulled this off. We actually did it after, 13, 14 months of planning and fermenting and everything back and forth and figuring it out. I mean, it's with a group of eight great people. We absolutely pulled this off. And I think that our philanthropy too will be excited about that, which is Pencil here in Nashville. They help out with Metro Nashville school students with school supplies, making sure a lot of the underserved children in our community get all the supplies they need for school and get what they need to the basis to succeed in life. So I'm very thankful we all came together to do that. So another local aspect to the whole project.
Drinking good beer for
Brandon, it sounds like you're saying good things take time.
I am. I think there's a famous sign up somewhere in Brussels about that.
Now we're really tying it together.
Yes.
Vinnie, Jeffrey, Matt, Khristopher, Jeff, Brandon, thanks for doing this. Thanks for putting this beer together. Everybody who's coming into Nashville is going to be excited to be drinking it, myself included. And thanks for doing what you do in the name of beer, and for being on the show this week. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John. Thanks, guys.
What's a collaboration that you remember fondly? Email me. It's John Hall. That's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com, or you can tell me on Twitter at John_Hall. That's also how you can get in touch with questions, comments, and guest suggestions. Don't forget, put Funkfest on your list of things to do this year. May 6th in Nashville, with some of the very best brewers in the country pouring in a really relaxed setting. The ticket price actually includes food, and you can get yours by visiting the Yazoo website or by searching Funkfest on Eventbrite. We're going to be there having conversations with brewers of note. And if you can't make it for whatever reason, stay tuned to this channel, and we will bring you those interviews soon enough. A reminder, please go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, and can read great new content, as well as our archives, which go back to 1979. Don't forget, follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com, or simply go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. A few bucks really does go a long way. Don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer, 8 years old now, has new episodes still every Monday at 5 o'clock, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.